I feel like AI would have a more objective sense of ethics and morality. And
Yes. Justice is supposed to be blind, and people are not impartial.
if AI were the judge and you had each side presenting their arguments in a fact-based manner,
Mm.
that AI would probably hand down the correct verdict, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and not only that, but it would have access to the entirety of all case law. That's a really good point because, like, the elites always get light sentences if they even get a
Oh yeah.
sentence at
Oh
all.
yeah. All right. Welcome to another Kitchen Sink Microscopy. I am Casey Rochford, but you knew that because you're a big fan, right? Big fans like and share and subscribe. So if you're really a big fan, you've already done that, right? Wink, wink.
And I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we Casey and I we write our own music, and so with any luck, there will be a fresh song that you've never heard before at the end of the episode. So stick around for that. Yeah, and so that said, what do you think we should talk about today, Casey?
Ah, that song smells fresh. Um, Today I thought it would be good to talk about, uh, a little bit in the vein of, like dystopian literature and how, say, something like Big Brother comes about and is not such a great thing. How do you think computers and technology in general have affected our justice system?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think it's made things a lot less, or it's a lot less personal, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think it's kind of always been very bureaucratic, except for maybe the early days of various systems. But at one point in time, there were, it was all about paper and pieces of paper, documents, and things. But yeah, now it's all digital, and people are basically numbers at this point.
yeah. But also like I kind of wonder if we're veering towards, especially with like AI, if we're veering towards a system where um, justice is almost doled out by the technology itself, like because I mean we already kind of have this with red light cameras,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's yeah, they have somebody like reviewing stuff, right? Like, but really you have a camera telling you that you broke the law. There's not really like any wiggle room there or like an actual chance to explain the situation so well. Like of course you can go to court, but like that's really not a feasible option
Well, and
for a lot of
actually,
people.
let's say it's a situation where you were, say, speeding because you were taking somebody to the hospital. You could
Right.
explain that to a cop, but if it, you get nabbed by the red light camera, well, now you got to go to court and say that, but like there's no evidence necessarily, like necessarily depending on the circumstance, but like kind of, I think it's a little difficult to prove after the fact.
Yeah. And cameras in general, like, yeah, it's made it easier to catch people doing bad things, but it's also um I don't know, probably created a lot of situations where it looked like something bad was happening but didn't, and
Yeah,
created a problem that wasn't there, or
that's a good point too, and yeah, I mean, there's other issues. It's like who determines what a bad thing is, like I mean, facial recognition is became becoming a thing all over the place in big cities. I mean, throughout the world,
Yeah,
where it's like they can track your every move, and maybe just like tracking your usage of the internet, piecing together a quote crime that maybe didn't exist. It didn't
yeah.
happen. Like, hey, you're looking up these things, or you were shopping here or in there, and you were walking through this place at that time, and like, maybe they would just assume or fill in the blanks essentially.
Mhm.
Um,
Anytime you have just like one perspective, that's way too easy to do.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there's like this company where you can like upload a picture and they'll print like a face mask or
Yeah.
whatever of your own face, presumably. But there
Mm-hmm.
are people like printing other people's faces and putting them on and like tricking facial recognition with them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. It's
That's
very
not
easy.
good, right?
It's pretty easy to circumvent that. And then at that point, that's kind of like deep fakes, basically. You could commit a crime in someone else's image.
Right.
Like you do something and then they look at the cameras and the facial recognition system and they're like, oh yeah, Bob was right there. He was the only person there walking through there at night where that person was murdered or something like,
And it's like a lo-fi deep fake too. Like
yeah.
in that case, you're tricking the technology instead of the technology tricking us. Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I am a little concerned about the scope of that getting out of hand, especially combining AI. Like I think AI is a good thing, but it can definitely be used for malicious purposes. And you know, there's kind of a soft maliciousness of in crime fighting, basically, like picking on certain people,
yeah.
basically.
I mean, in the true scientific method, I think it would be prudent to avoid using things like AI in the justice field until it's been properly understood and tested and get some of the bugs worked out first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, yeah, it does kind of depend because certainly AI could go too far in a bad direction.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, if we don't understand it, and maybe we should also analyze whether we even really should be employing it in those fields at
Well,
all.
I think it would be a good thing somewhere down the road because I feel like AI would have a more objective sense of ethics and morality
Yes. Well, you know
and
the classic image of the lady, the justice lady holding the scales and with the blindfold and stuff. Like
mhm,
justice is supposed to be blind, and
mhm.
people are not impartial. Like I know that a lot of judges try to be, but obviously that isn't always the case.
Right.
And I think an AI that's properly cultivated could actually be truly impartial, or as impartial as we can possibly make it. Obviously, there's going to be biases that are baked into everything.
Now,
Um,
actually, if all judges were replaced with AI,
mhm.
I actually kind of would make the argument that that would be better because the way AI is best used is with a back and forth interaction, right?
Yeah.
Like you have a conversation with it, it learns the details and everything. So if AI were the judge and you had each side presenting their arguments in a fact-based manner,
Mhm.
that AI would probably hand down the correct verdict, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and not only that, but it would have access to the entirety of all case law, you know,
Yeah.
from all throughout history,
Oh yeah. It
whereas
would be
a human
interesting.
being, they have to look at a book or get on a computer and look at, and there's just too many things to reference where AI totally
Yeah.
could see it all at once, like a big picture sort of thing. And maybe it would be more fair, I
I
think.
wonder if anyone's asked like Chat GPT what verdict it would hand down to OJ Simpson or something. Like it
Oh
would be
yeah.
interesting to like look side by side at what an AI would decide in any particular case.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, we'd have to get to the point where an AI could comprehend certain concepts, like more abstract concepts that it kind of can't yet. Um, but I think that time is coming.
Yeah, I mean, it would be free of bias against skin color and
Mm-hmm.
economic status and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's a thing. Like, that's a really good point because, like, the elites always get light sentences if they even get a
oh yeah.
sentence at
Oh
all.
yeah. Yeah.
Like, imagine a system
Huh.
that's blind to that. Like, it doesn't care who you are.
Huh. Now I'm kind of jumping on the other side of the fence. Like feeling like that might not be a bad idea, actually. Like
Well, yeah.
I mean, as long as it's not something that you lean 100% on, like
Yes.
like
True.
it would actually be not only interesting to look at retroactive cases and see what AI determines, but take in the data and say like, okay, when did they agree? What were the circumstances like? When did they
Mhm.
disagree and what was going on there? Was there some nefarious uh kind of
Yeah.
like questionable things happening there? And you can like weed out the shitty judges maybe. Like
True.
hey, you might be taking bribes or something, like maybe it's time for you to go.
Well, and maybe yeah, AI could be a useful analysis tool too to kind of
Yeah.
like police the system.
Hmm.
And one way I was just thinking about this, like it wouldn't need to be just rolled out. Like, oh, okay, we have an AI that's there and we roll it out. No, I think what we ought to be doing is employing it as like a practice system. Like I remember I took a like a law class in high school or something, and we had like fake court cases that we went through and stuff. And um, that would be something interesting just to like, okay, we'll present this as if it actually happened to the AI and see what the outcome is. Many,
Hmm.
many different scenarios and things like that. And if it turns out that like when it, basically you're training it at the same time, but also analyzing like how impartial is the AI system.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it would that would certainly work pretty well. I mean, we'd obviously have to
Chat
also
GPT is all like, I am the law.
yeah, yeah, yep. Great movie. Oh my god. But another place where I think things like AI could work really well is in analyzing law itself.
Yeah.
Because currently the way things work is things are created, rules are created, like legislated into existence basically um, by our quote representatives, and they're just fact basically like, well, okay, they said this is bad, so you can't do it now. Otherwise, this is the consequence. Well,
Hmm.
you know, maybe that like an AI system could even look at those things and kind of like you're saying, weed out the bad judges. Well, how about weed out bad legislation?
Yeah.
And
And
like,
like old, antiquated,
yep,
irrelevant stuff too.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
because the way it is, like, yeah, the only way to get rid of bad laws like that is essentially like through the Supreme Court. Like, you have to take things to the top to some, and then they'll essentially nullify something. But like, all kinds of suffering and stuff could be happening
Yeah.
until that happens, if it even does. And like, yeah, we're just stuck with this stupid law. Like an
That's
AI
such a
could
convoluted system. Like,
I know. Well, I get the principle. Like
yeah.
it makes sense, or maybe it made sense at one point in time why things work the way they do.
Well,
But
there
yeah,
was
maybe
a
it's time to change things.
yeah, there was a lightning round topic you brought up once about sunset legislation or
Oh,
something.
yeah, yeah. Like they should all have an end, and of whatever that might be,
Uh-huh.
where at, not that necessarily a piece of legislation will just immediately go away, but it will then have to be analyzed by an independent panel um, to see like, hey, is this effective, or does it have some kind of unforeseen consequences or something like that?
Yeah.
And that's a perfect place for AI to be
Oh yeah, it would really speed up the process. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and again, it would be impartial because one of the problems too is all the people who say maybe want something to be in place, like drug laws or right, because like the SWAT teams and the police, they want to keep that in place, and probably a lot of politicians and stuff. And maybe this kind of system could be completely independent of them and overrule them. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if how much you want this thing, it's harming people,
Huh.
and so therefore it needs to go away. And
So it would be extra interesting to have an AI, like a law AI kind of in place, and ask it some of these like really controversial questions about things like gun rights or privacy laws. Like, does AI think it's okay to have cameras everywhere, and
yeah, or
leaning so heavily into that?
well, and yeah, I think it would help in a lot of these kind of like controversial hot button kind of things like abortion or something like that,
Yeah, yeah,
because it wouldn't necessarily have any emotion or like any kind of interest in those things necessarily, and it would be able to actually look from an objective perspective.
right. It would
Whereas a human being,
basically
obviously,
be, yeah, it would be thinking about autonomy and things
mm-hmm.
like that, things that are actually applicable to actual living beings.
Yeah, well, for sure, and that actually, I think the critical thing, of course, is to kind of give it a central core, like I guess, like this is what we're hoping to achieve. These are the foundational principles that you will be following,
Hmm.
and they need to be simple, and not have exceptions because that's exactly how we end up with things being so complicated.
Right.
There's always exceptions and more and more and more are added every day, and then it gets confusing, and then of course you have the elites who benefit from those exceptions, and then the rest of us who are punished by
Yep.
the lack of uh, the ability to take advantage of those exceptions, basically.
That's kind of the linchpin, is like, how do you fairly implement something like that when the people that would be in control of implementing it as it stands would have every available access to twist it in their favor?
Well, it definitely would have to be open source for sure. There's no way could have something like that that would be closed. It would have to be
Hmm.
completely transparent. Um, I guess one thing, it's kind of like, how everybody's talking about, oh, we should have term limits for Congress, right? And everybody agrees, like, yeah, that makes sense. Why have these people been here for decades?
Yeah.
Let some other new people come in. Well, of course, the people who can make that happen are the people we're talking about.
Right.
So why? And they're like completely not in favor of that. I mean, maybe a few people in Congress are, but they're outnumbered by the ones who want to stay there. The old fogies that are still sticking around.
Yeah.
Um, and but that's what my point is, like trying to implement something like this would be challenging
Yeah.
because it would have to be like it would basically have to be implemented by the people it's replacing.
Yep.
And I don't think people would be in favor of that.
Right. It's, yeah. And yeah, the term limits thing, like, I don't think there's a way around that because there wasn't checks and balances in place for it. Just
Yeah.
like there's speculation that even if Trump gets convicted of all these crimes and somehow wins the election, he could pardon himself. Like,
That would
what?
be weird.
That,
How
how is that on any planet, on any in any ethics classroom? How would that ever be allowed as part of like a functioning society? Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's the president.
I
Like
know
let him
that
just
would
say
be
break the law. It's fine.
which
Like,
which I think that's a big oversight because I mean
yeah,
this is one situation, but if that does come to pass, then that means a president could basically do whatever the hell they want. I mean,
mm-hmm.
commit legit outright crimes like right on the street in front of everybody and then be
Yep,
like, "Hey, I pardon myself." Like
yeah.
just go around. I mean, basically like a king at that point,
Oh yeah,
which is
exactly.
kind of
Like
wild. Like, okay, so
that's that's the most dangerous thing. If that like course of events actually plays out, then all Trump has to do is break the law, go turn himself in, and then pardon himself.
Yeah.
Like
Well, that
speedy trial, like to the nth degree,
and
like
that's what I'm saying. Like that would, if I don't know if that's actually possible, but it sounds like it could be. But if that does happen, that's my point. Is it would set a precedent
yeah.
that anybody could now do that.
Mm-hmm.
And oof, I mean, okay, pardons aside, almost every president has certainly been involved in very questionable, potentially criminal activity, bad things, authorizing bad things, and getting away with it over and over and over again. Well, and then it's just the president. I mean, we can go all the way down through the pyramid, and there's
Mm-hmm.
corruption everywhere. And maybe that's another thing where computers could just completely replace all this stuff. Like, why do we
Yeah.
need why do we need to go through the trouble of like people running for a particular position and this popularity contest and getting votes and everybody goes out and they vote and da 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 and like now there's this people, there's these and they're all, it's a big mess, and then they don't even side with like, well, I mean, that's a well-known thing that statistically uh, politicians never vote or behave uh, according to what their constituents want. It's always some other interest. Um, and
Hmm.
so you could have a computer system, an AI system, basically replace all that. Like
Yeah.
it would basically be looking to see, okay, what are the rules? What rules should we even have? And as things change and move around, this system could adapt to that and say, hey, here's a change because this reason, and I've analyzed it, and that kind of thing. And of course, again, it has to be like a scientific process. We say, okay, there's a certain amount of time where this piece of legislation will be in place and we will observe and see the effects of it. And if the effects are the same as the intent, then it probably could stick around. But if the effects are different, well, then we need to just let it go
Hmm.
and try again. Maybe also, an AI would be great at analyzing like the whys and hows and things like that. Whereas human beings, they don't know enough about what's going on in the world around them to connect the dots essentially to like,
Hmm.
hey, why did this thing not work? Or why is it having this effect? Like most people are completely blind and in the dark to that. Like they're oblivious. But an AI having access to like all the information
Yeah.
could put it all together and be like, hey, this is the reason. Well, we'll make this minor adjustment to whatever and see what happens. And
I think I have an idea for how this could be implemented, and this is absolutely not a way to overthrow the government. Wink, wink. Um, Now, what if you created some kind of sub government, let's say,
mm-hmm.
a private club that's got nationwide members, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even international, let's say international.
It would,
Like
yeah, I agree.
the
It
whole
should
world,
be.
the whole world can jump on if they like the ideas and
We
stuff.
we are one world. Like we need
Yeah.
to. Anything that's implemented like that should not involve borders or nationalities or
Yeah.
anything like that.
But it's all based around like we work together with AI.
Mm-hmm.
We pay attention to history and try to learn from it, and we try to craft these ideas almost like a war game style sort of thing, like, or like what kids do in school where they like pretend to be governments and work
Yeah,
together. Oh,
simulations essentially.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So basically, create it in that vein, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then at some point, when there's enough members, like there could be a situation where maybe if you wanted to forcefully say this should be how the government is, you could. Um,
Well, and it may end up not even
but
needing any
but not
force.
saying you
No,
would.
no, no. The
Wink,
thing is,
wink.
it may not necessarily require any force because if you put a system together like that and you have evidence of its functionality, like how well it works, then that should speak for itself. I think that you
Yeah,
could
but
say, look, we look at this, how this is working, and maybe I agree, like a global kind of club or whatever that test this out, but also you could implement it on a small scale. You could say, hey, this little town here, instead of having a judge and police and whatnot, and these legislators and politicians, we just have an AI system and test it in a small scale and build it in a small scale and then expand out from there.
yeah,
I think that might be one way to do it.
I wonder if you could create the concept of a sovereign philosophy,
Hmm.
like kind of like a nomadic country. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, theoretically, that would even be the way to like have anarchism like officially recognized
Hmm.
as a way of living.
Yeah.
Because as long as you had like sort of a treatise in place where like no one of these sovereign philosophies could transgress upon the other with
Yeah.
like say like, well, you just did that here like in my yard and that's punishable by death here, so
Yeah.
you can't do that to people that are like ignorant of what's going on, right? Like as
Exactly.
long as that sort of thing is in place, I think it would be a very peaceful interaction.
I agree. And I think, if you keep your principles simple and reasonable and rational, that things that pretty much everybody could agree on, I think it would work. And this is where AI courts and things would come in handy, because really there are these principles and sometimes they clash, right? Like the non-aggression principle, for instance. Like there are times where it's difficult to figure out if one person is transgressing upon another or vice versa, from a human perspective, like, because everybody thinks that the world revolves around them, so you did this thing and therefore you're violating my rights or something, and they're like, no, I did that because of this and you're violating my rights. So this is where you need some third party arbiter to come in and analyze that. So I mean, even in like an anarchist society, you'd have courts, because
Yeah,
these kind of confusing situations always arise, and you
right.
need somebody to be able to, kind of like the town elders or something, right? Like the intelligent ones who are like, wise and know many things, and they're the ones that everybody trusts. So
Yeah,
if they say, hey, no, it's not you, you're the one that did the wrong thing, and this is what you have to do to reconcile this.
yeah,
um
that's the kind of outside the box thinking that you not only need, but you kind of depend on something like AI to be able to think four dimensionally for you. Like,
yeah.
like, could this work? Has something like this ever worked? Based on what has worked and what hasn't, how likely would this sort of thing work? Uh, all kinds of stuff like that is much more easy for AI to kind of break down for us, I think.
Well, actually, yeah, that's a good point too. AI, a sufficiently knowledgeable AI, could run simulations before anything even changes, before a change is made. Like
Yeah.
it has access to the current state of existence and knowledge of how things interact, and it could pass something through a filter essentially. Like, okay, we're going to run some simulations and
Yeah.
multiple iterations and make a few adjustments, randomize things a little bit, and just see what the outcome is. And if
Yeah.
probabilistically it's higher this way, then it's probably good. And if it's that way, it's probably bad or something like that.
Yeah. A system that's always like 10 moves ahead
Mm-hmm.
is definitely better than anything that's currently operating on Earth.
That's for sure. Oh yeah, because the current system that pretty much exists around the world is very self-serving.
Yeah.
Like it on paper, or its claim is that it wants to be a benefactor of society, right? Every politician is like, I'm going to make things better. They all say that, but is that really their goal? I
Well,
don't think the facts bear that out when you look at what actually happens, like what their actions are, is completely contrary to those kinds of principles.
that reminds me of a minute microscopy I did, which maybe we should link up there if we remember, um, where I kind of sort of tongue in cheek make the argument that AI should rule the world. It should take over because, uh, there's always this slippery slope argument that, oh no, Skynet, like it's gonna like dominate us and enslave us and all this stuff. But that like implies sort of human emotion because there's no lust for power that is inherent in coding or machines or like
True.
that's all human stuff. Like
Oh
that's
yeah. Well, and a lot of the concerns people have are based on fantastical sci-fi, movies and things like
yeah.
and stories. Like,
Power only corrupts emotion. Like power can't really corrupt logic.
well, and especially a system that has global reach. Like, why would it go to war? Why would war ever happen if you have a global AI system that kind of
Right?
manages things, you
Yeah.
know? And it doesn't have to manage the minutia. It doesn't have to like micromanage humankind, in your day-to-day interactions. All it has to do is negotiate tricky situations. Like that's pretty much it. Like a catastrophe or something, or you know some kind of conflict that people have, like that's really all it needs to do, because
Yeah.
generally people left to their own devices pretty much get along. Like they walk around and go to stores, they get in line, they oh, let this old lady in, and oh, I'll get out of the seat in the bus so some the person with the wheelchair or whatever, that kind of thing. Like people work together all the time. Like something happens, a big disaster happens, and people just rally. Like they don't even know each other. In fact, the what was it? I think the earthquake or something in India. Was it India that happened a while back? So there
Turkey had
were
a big one. I know.
what was that?
Turkey had a big
Turkey.
one.
That I think that was it. So people came from around the world to like help pull people out of rubble and stuff. And it was weird because there were Russians and Ukrainian rescue
Mm.
people working together.
Yep.
Like they're at war with each other, but yet here they are in some other country that's not theirs, helping pull people out of the rubble. Like that's what people generally do. People just
Yeah.
get along. The conflicts that everybody thinks exist, they're artificial. They're manufactured by these elite systems that want us to participate in their madness. You know?
A friend of mine from a lab I used to work in is half Russian, half Ukrainian.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like
So,
they're actually like, government aside, they're all friends. Like
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, they're neighbors, and
yeah,
there's some of well, it's kind of like Mexico in the U.S. or Canada in the U.S. There's people that live in all three of
I
those
mean,
countries that
left to ourselves, we probably wouldn't have war per se. Of course, we'd have disagreements and skirmishes
sure
between individuals and things like that. You can't really avoid that as
that does
humans.
happen. Yeah.
But if we all implemented an AI system, uh, even as just an advisor
Mm-hmm.
to the top tiers, right? Uh, yeah, I think you make a good point. I think war would be a thing of the past.
Yeah,
Like this actually could be the stepping stone to a Roddenberry-esque sort of future
I think so. Yeah.
because like not only the lack of war, not only getting along with everybody, but uh, uncovering blockades to scientific discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've probably made huge strides that the common person doesn't even realize are just sitting somewhere collecting dust because it doesn't like suit the economic uh, whims of the elite.
Or the discoverer or inventor of it doesn't really know how it can be employed.
Yeah.
That's actually very common. Like
Or
people
they were
invent things.
killed and all their papers were taken by the
Yeah.
government.
Exactly. Well,
Tesla.
well, I think you're right because like so it wouldn't an AI system acting in an advisory role um, would be perfect because it doesn't have to be a dictatorial system, like
Right.
authoritative, you know, some kind of thing like that. Just a trusted uh, resource, basically, like an elder or something, um, because it would potentially be able to find solutions to problems that people aren't aware exist,
Yeah.
where a conflict emerges between two parties, right? And they're all like, well, you this and that, and they're angry at each other and fighting. And maybe the AI is like, hey, look, there's a simple solution. Just do this thing. And you're
Yeah.
both happy, you know? And they'd be like, well, oh, yeah, you're right. Like, what are we
Right.
fighting over now? You
And
know?
AI should totally be like the public relations
Mm-hmm.
like bot basically, and it
Yeah.
would totally be like, yeah, so we do have aliens here, by the way. You know,
Yeah.
like it would just totally tell us, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. And it would also, not only that, but it would know the way to tell people in a way that doesn't panic them.
right.
Like, that
Yeah,
AI, so
imagine
AI
being
is,
like think of the procedure that saved the life of your loved one that was developed from reverse engineering alien technology.
yeah.
Like, don't be afraid,
Mm-hmm.
but we've got aliens in
Yeah.
our midst, and we benefit from it.
Yep,
Like it's a good
exactly.
thing.
And they're not necessarily bad. Or maybe there's some that are maybe malicious, but the rest are all good.
If they were bad, we'd all be dead.
Oh, well,
Let's face
yes, yeah, this
let's
is
face
true.
it. Like
Yeah.
aliens are more than likely here, and they are more than likely uh,
Benign
either
ish.
benign or totally enslaved, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah.
But they're
Oh yeah,
definitely not a
District
threat.
9 kind of stuff
Yeah,
might be, and that, you know, that's also a possibility.
it is, and that honestly and sadly, that's probably the only reason it's being kept quiet
Hmm. And that could be, yeah.
because it's not it doesn't make us look good,
True.
right?
Well, and that's where I think, you know, AI not having like an ego um would be a very beneficial manager of things.
Yeah.
I think, and you know, obviously it would have to be carefully implemented. And again, as an advisor, like it's basically just a box that you talk to and it gives you an answer, not something that has the reins over things like, I don't know, say military technology, um, and decision making in that regard, and can't necessarily take over. I mean, it's pretty
Yeah.
easy to create a system that can't do that because I mean, it would basically be. I see AI as being more like the Oracle, right? You go
Uh-huh.
to it
Uh-huh.
for answers,
Yeah.
and you then can choose what you want to do with that answer. Um, but of course, if the answer is correct and beneficial, then well, of course he would do it. Like if you go to the AI and you're like, I'm poor and I don't know what to do and I'm struggling paying bills and I have like 5 kids and I don't know how do I get out of this? Well, if it gave you the perfect solution, you wouldn't be like, oh, that's that's shash. I'm not going to do that. You know, you'd be like, wow, cool. I have the answer now.
Yeah. Yeah, this is such a good topic. Oh my God. Like there's a lot of great ideas here.
Oh man.
And
Oh,
it makes me want to ask the viewers to create their own episode based off of this one. And
yeah.
send it in. Send it in.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah. We could
I
do
want to
third party
see
stuff.
KSM like evolve and expand, and like
Yeah,
see
I
other people like attempt this sort of format.
exactly. Well, and you know, my own personal philosophy, I don't see this as like our property per se. This is just
Right.
our creation, that we put out there to the world. Um, just like music, it's the same thing. I don't feel like I own the songs that I wrote. It's just things that I thought of and I created. You know, it's there for everybody to enjoy and manipulate and change and you know, change into something else if they want, lift little bits out of, whatever, you know, like be inspired by, you know, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's certainly how I feel about the show. It's like, yeah, I encourage more of that. Yeah. And I think that's one way to, I mean, ultimately change the world if everybody thought that way.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be part of the sub-government of kitchen sink microscopy,
like
we're more than happy to sign you up.
1,000 years from now, like the people of Earth are like, curse that kitchen sink microscopy, the AI is taking over.